I know she's done stuff for
So I really do get one of
What I'm doing here is running up.
I'm not doing this right.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
She's very negatively. It's a French hot place. So I kind of want to go. That's great.
Because it's anything
We're not
Right now, I'm just writing up.
Well, let's go ahead and get going. I did get the tests graded. Most of you have picked them up. Some haven't. Maybe at break time, you can go ahead and grab them. I think what I'll do is I'll just send you the key and take a look at it. Then, if you got any questions, you can come and see me about them. Everybody did actually very well. I think the lowest score was like 75, which isn't bad at all. The average was in the upper 80s. So anyway, not bad. Any questions before we get started today? We're all happy. Okay, sounds good. So there are two topics. Okay, I was going to say, where'd it go? There are two topics I want to spend time with. One is flavor enhancers, and the second one is going to be quality control. I sent you one on emulsions, thinking we may or may not get to it. So let's kind of see what happens with that one. So let's go ahead and take a look. Like I say, start on enhancers. This is a formal definition, compounds which have no flavor of their own at usage levels, but yet intensify or enhance the flavor of a food. The industry and oftentimes just usage of that term, enhancer, does vary a great deal, and industry tends to use it in a much more liberal sense. But this is a requirement if you're strict with the rules. If it does more than enhance, if it actually changes, or let's say it can't have a flavor of its own. So before the low level has flavor of its own, it has to change the flavor. And I'm going to give you an example of this one, where it's a little different definition. And it's the center of a number of lawsuits, and that's why I say there's a different definition of it that's sometimes used. There's number of lawsuits about saying a food product is naturally flavored. And those products are those that, in most cases, or less one group of cases, let's put it that way, is when the product contains malic acid. And malic acid is called an enhancer to some people. It enhances a fruit flavor, especially.
I don't think we have that slide.
Yeah.
Nope, you don't. Can't have them all. Just doesn't go that way. How's that for sympathetic? No, I spent some time this afternoon going through it and said, oh, I'm going to add this one. There's a couple others that are probably added too, but not much for the most part. They're the same. And so this is, so the malic acid is on the label. It's labeled as artificial, so malic acid is known to be artificial, but the flavoring is natural. And so the company says naturally flavored, and they say malic acid is an enhancer. It enhances the sweetness, tartness of both of a fruit product. And the question is, does malic acid have a flavor? If it has a flavor at the usage level, it does not qualify as a strict enhancer. So the food companies are saying, oh, no, it doesn't have any flavor. And we've gone around about this. Well, how do we prove it? Well, formulate the food with and without malic acid, do a sensory panel and say, can you tell a difference between them? And malic acid at its usage level, can people taste the difference in the products or not? And I haven't seen any company take us up on that one. I don't think they want to know because more than likely the malic acid does have a flavor, and then it wouldn't qualify as an enhancer. So it's rather interesting. A number of large companies are being stuck on this one at the moment. Sam?
How does that affect, or like, why would that matter if they could call it an enhancer or not? Because on the label it's flavor.
If malic acid is a flavorant and it's artificial, they can't label it naturally flavored. It could be natural and artificial, because everybody wants to put natural on there somehow. So they say natural and artificial. If it's an enhancer, they just have to say natural flavored. That's pictures of forest, mountains, beautiful sunshine, all these other things that go along with nature. Okay.
Yeah, so just to clarify, it's, you can have artificial enhancers in a naturally flavored food and it's a naturally flavored food. Never, like, you don't have to label that they're artificial enhancers.
No. It goes on the label as, as, and we could go on the label as malic acid if in fact that was an enhancer. Yeah. And so that's an interesting one. And like I say, I don't know how the courts are coming down on this one. I look forward to it. It'll be interesting. It's interesting, though, that umami is a taste sensation. And glutamic acid, or umami, glutamic acid, monosodium glutamate, more correctly, does have a taste, and it's very savory in character. Umami is a basic taste. But basically what we say is that if monosodium glutamate is used below the levels which it does have a flavor itself, it can be called an enhancer. So that's another interesting one that people haven't gone after. The glutamic acid could be under the same scrutiny, for that matter. Is it an enhancer? Is it natural? But no one's gone after that yet. They're after malic acid. So when we think about savory enhancers, two groups of compounds, some L-amino acids fit in this category, and the 5' nucleotides. So these two groups are very good at enhancing savory flavors, and they're the largest group of enhancers that are used in the industry. In terms of L-amino acids, monosodium glutamate is by far the most commonly known amino acid that's used as an enhancer. It is the monosodium form, and so if it's at very low pHs, it doesn't work at all in terms of enhancement. So it only works on more of the neutral category, where we've got one sodium group put on the amino acid. So that's why it isn't used in sweet, or one reason why it's not used in sweet. It just doesn't function at low pHs. It only functions at neutral or higher pHs as an enhancer. This actually was identified in 1909 in Japan, found in sea tangle, Japanese recipes, very commonly called for dried seaweed in the recipe. And it wasn't for the flavor of the seaweed, it was for the enhancing effects. It just made the soups, the broths, much richer, fuller in mouthfeel and so on. And so 1909, that was identified. Sensory threshold was 0.01%. So below that level usage, they're enhancers. They're certainly very legal. Produced by fermentation, greater than 500,000 metric tons produced annually. As I said, this is pH dependent, and so it's only neutral or basic situations where we get enhancing effect. There's absolutely no effect of the free acid. We'll talk about labeling a little bit later on. Consumer opinion tends to be against the use of monosodium glutamate. It has a bad image with the general consumer. It's typically been associated with Chinese restaurant syndrome. That's basically what it's called. It's a Chinese restaurant syndrome. People get flushed, warm, I don't know what other sensations that characterize the syndrome, that maybe being flushed in color and warm. So that's what's considered to be a result or a reaction to monosodium glutamate, why it has a negative view. There's been a lot of work done on this, a lot of publications, and there's never been any definite conclusions that say monosodium glutamate does have a negative effect in general. And so it's generally considered this is more of a consumer opinion than it is in fact a fact. How's that? And you'll see later on where Parmesan cheese and tomato paste really have much more monosodium glutamate than you ever add to a recipe. And nobody ever claims that adding tomato paste to Parmesan makes them flush and gives the same symptoms. So that's, like I say, something that we have to deal with, or the industry has to deal with. It's a very functional component. It adds very much a flavor that people like, but they don't like to see it on the label. So L-glutamic acid, that's by far the most common one in terms of the L-amino acids. A little bit of a problem with using some of the other ones, ibotenic acid, tricholomic, and threonine, are also L-amino acids that have somewhat similar flavors or similar tastes and sensations. We don't see them used mainly because they tend to be not very healthy. How's that? One of them is used as a poison for flies. I don't remember where the other ones get used, but they're not used in the food industry. They're not generally approved for human consumption. This, if we look at effectiveness using Hinami intensity over here, here's our monosodium glutamate. That's a relative intensity 1. It takes 5 to 30 times. I'm sorry. Tricholomic acid is 5 to 30 times stronger than glutamic acid. Ibotenic acid is also 5 to 30 times stronger than glutamic acid. But like I say, we can't use these as food ones. A monosodium threonine hydroxyglutamate. I've never seen this on the label or being used. I haven't seen this being used, and actually any of these being used in foods. Apparently they don't work as well, or they don't give you the same sensation. Maybe they don't want to put on the label. I'm not sure what it is. Of the L-amino acids, glutamic acid, monosodium glutamate is the component that's used. So that's the L-amino acids. The 5' nucleic acids, inosine monophosphate, IMP, inosine monophosphate, guanosine monophosphate. And now I forget what the X is, but it'll come up in a moment. How's that? And so we have the basic same structure in all these cases, where it's a phosphate, a sugar, then put on the nucleic acid group here. And so these are also, like I say, enhancers. They are used typically in combination. Oops, did I go the? No, I didn't go the wrong way. Okay. We'll see that they're very commonly used in combination with monosodium glutamate. So they function themselves, but very commonly they're used together. Here's our inosine monophosphate, guanosine, xanthylate. Okay, here's our other one. It kind of gives a relative strength. The guanolate's 2.2 times more effective, or higher intensity. This one is only 0.6 as intensive as the inosine monophosphate. So this is kind of the base, and everything's rated relative to that. There's another, again, a large group of other 5' nucleotides that have been looked at in terms of enhancing ability. And again, you don't see them used. Is it a matter that they're not approved? Is it a matter that they're not as effective? Well, in terms of effectiveness, it looks like some are effective. There may just not be a source of these, or we can produce these in buckets. And more than likely, it's a matter that it's just a problem producing these in quantity. So the 5' inosine and the guanolate are the two materials that are used to the greatest extent. Where were they identified? How do we know that they're enhancers? Whatever made us think this is something that we should be using, or again in Japan, bonito, dry fish, put in again the same type of things. Soup in Japan, 1913 identified. They took it apart, decided identified what it was, and it's a mixture actually of the 5' inosine monophosphate and the 5-guanosine monophosphate. And they're very effective compounds. So we've got our L amino acids and we have our 5' nucleotides that are useful to us in this area. Not well defined how they work. That's always interesting. You do sensory studies and kind of keep on saying there's an effect. They work, but it's no one's really found a receptor site that functions in this category. And so everybody agrees that it does have an effect, but how do they bind the sites, what sites they bind to, is not well defined. And again, you look at literature, there's a lot of difference in the literature. They work, but again, how or why isn't well defined. There's a synergy between the 5' nucleotides and monosodium glutamate, and this basically is giving an idea of what kind of mixtures. And this is a mixture. If you go across it, you can get it at 0%, 1, 2, 3, 4, 12%. That's the percent of 5' inosine monophosphate in MSG INT blend. So these blends are mostly monosodium glutamate with small amounts of the 5' nucleotides. And you can see this is basically the effectiveness. So the 12% has much more effect in terms of sensory than does 4% 2-1 or appears without any of the inosine monophosphate. So very effective, very synergistic effect between the two materials. And they are commonly used as a blend. The optimum usage combination, basically some of the studies have shown, they say, okay, a 1-to-1 ratio of inosine monophosphate with monosodium glutamate gives the maximum synergy. There's a synergy between nucleotides as well. Inosine and guanosine, put them together, you get a saving. The threshold of inosine monophosphate itself is 0.025%. Basically, the same threshold too of guanosine monophosphate, a little bit lower. Put them together 1-to-1. The combination is a lower threshold than either one individually. So again, the idea of using a combination of the 5' nucleotides gives you some saving in money. It's interesting, though, that what we tend to find available for the most part are 95-5. So 1 part to 1 part would be most effective, but you don't tend to get that. Most times, companies are selling 95-5 blend for reasons of cost. So it's cheaper to get that blend. And the blend oftentimes isn't just IMP, it's also GMP. So the blends that you get aren't the most effective, but they're the most cost effective. How's that sound? If you were a good purist, you'd say, oh, it's better to use a 1-to-1 blend and do this. But from a cost standpoint, this is basically what you buy or what you use. These are some usage levels. Dehydrated soups. So it's a dry product, maybe 5 to 8% monosodium glutamate. And we look at 5' nucleotides, 0.1, 0.2% commonly found in a dry soup. Canned soups, again, a little bit substantially lower, of course, than the water in there, right? So this is a dry basis and a wet basis. And you kind of look through these numbers: sauces, dressings, ketchup, ham, and crab, asparagus. Very commonly find MSG and the 5' nucleotides added to these products. They're just very effective at enhancing.
Is the MSG added to ketchup, or is there also like follow-up MSG?
These are mainly added. Yeah, they're added levels, usage levels. Yep. Oops. Presence of MSG. Oh, this was what I have a reference for this, but this was a publication basically saying, do people prefer the MSG? Do they prefer the product that has monosodium glutamate? And so, bone chicken can, if you can the chicken or add some monosodium glutamate in canned chicken, 75% of the panelists preferred the sample with MSG, the product made with MSG. That's kind of the same as we go down the list, but not as much of a preference. So a very strong preference. People like it. Basically, people like it. This is the glutamic acid content of some foods. I told you Parmesan. Why do we add Parmesan to savory products? Is it because you love Parmesan cheese? No, we love the monosodium glutamate present in the Parmesan cheese. No, everything does taste better. Every savory thing does taste better. We'll grade the Parmesan over the top. Why? There's a 1.29% MSG in the Parmesan cheese. I don't have tomato paste here, which I should look for, because tomato paste is right up there as well. A tablespoon of tomato paste for the recipe. It's there for the MSG. You can find some really high levels in foods. That's one of the arguments that I guess companies have made against labeling MSG. There was a time when there was discussion going, should MSG be labeled, that it's added? Okay, then what do you do about things like Parmesan? Do you label Parmesan, put quotation marks, MSG, because probably there's more MSG in that Parmesan than you would have added as MSG if it were added on the side, or at least as much. So you get by without labeling the MSG in one case if it comes from the Parmesan or tomato paste. You have to label it if you added. So that was an interesting one too. There's about 150 pages of documents on that. This is comparing a commercial canned soup to a home recipe. Now, whose home recipe? That I don't know. Vegetable and beef soup. And if you make it at home, say don't have the recipe. There's 0.03%. If you buy the canned soup, that's probably Campbell soup. It's almost the same level. That kind of goes across the board. Basically, if you put soup and use the ingredients you're using, you're putting MSG in the product. You're not putting it as MSG, you're putting it in as a food ingredient. As I said, MSG really is only effective in 5.8 to 8 region, so it doesn't function at low regions. It is thoroughly unstable, so it will be damaged, retorting, canning processes. It will participate in the Maillard reaction, so in your fry, roasting, you're having the Maillard reaction take place, you're going to be consuming some of that MSG. And of course, it is water soluble. And so if you're doing any boiling of something, discarding the water that you cook it in, there's water losses from the product during processing or baking, you're going to find that you lose some of the MSG as well. So there are limitations. MSG is, 5' nucleotides, they're more stable to heat. You'll find you can go 40 minutes at 115 degrees centigrade. That's not quite retorting. But in a previous study, there was 23 to 25% loss of MSG. So there is loss due to heat. Lost with the water, there's enzymes in fresh meats. So again, if you would apply it to a fresh meat and process it or cook it, you would find that you lose some of the MSG effect. Enzyme monophosphate will be converted by enzymes as well down the line, so we lose their activity, unstable to irradiation. So these are destroyed. They're lost one way or another in processing. So you expect some losses to occur. The idea of hydrolyzed vegetable proteins, we have talked about those already. And so this will be somewhat redundant. Talked about them mainly in the processed flavors, meat-like flavors. They are components of these products. They do contribute to the idea of meatiness to foods. They do enhance naturally occurring savory flavors, round and balanced. So sure, HVPs function. And I think when I was talking about the processed meat flavors, they were initially primarily hydrolyzed vegetable proteins, so people tended to assume that is meat flavor. Well, that is the flavor. So it's kind of funny. And so there is an issue along those lines. People do identify it as meaty from what they've eaten in the marketplace. What are we talking about for hydrolyzed vegetable proteins? Where do they get their enhancing effects? They'll probably be 9 to 12% monosodium glutamate, so there's our enhancing effect. And of course, salt. A little bit of salt goes a long ways. Certainly, it enhances flavor in a sense. 40 to 45% salt. Where does the salt come from? Remember, these are acid hydrolyzed vegetable protein. And they got to neutralize them. They neutralize them with sodium hydroxide. And so what do we have left? Sodium chloride, so salt. So your hydrolyzed vegetable proteins contain a good deal of MSG, a great deal of salt. Are there any other peptides? There may be peptides that have some effects too, but they're certainly not as well known as MSG or the 5' nucleotides. I've talked to you, think about the monodichloropropanol. When we think about using them in processed flavors. So, talked about them, they basically are carcinogen. People don't want them, so obviously it's a problem using HVPs. HVPs contain monosodium glutamate, so if somebody thinks that they are troubled by monosodium glutamate, they'll be troubled by HVPs as well. So that gets linked together. Again, this is redundant in the sense that we can do enzyme hydrolyzed HVPs, but they don't have the main character that the acid hydrolyzed do. The acid hydrolyzed produce the monosodium glutamate, and that is the primary enhancer. So enzyme modified products, HVPs, don't function nearly as well as the acid hydrolyzed. And they've certainly been working on looking at the hydrolysis conditions to minimize the monodichloropropanol formation. Every company in the U.S., when they make a batch of hydrolyzed vegetable proteins, they analyze that batch for mono and dichloropropionol. That's one of their manufacturing considerations, is looking at minimizing those components. Table salt is a flavorant, and I think probably agree it's a flavor enhancer. It tends to be loved by all. Okay, I threw that in. People like salt. They do. It's always interesting. You might buy a low salt product, but then take it home and salt it, just out of habit. It's a very effective component. Tends not to be put in enhancer category. It is. So that's one. Is it enhancer? Is it considered enhancer or isn't it? It's certainly okay. It's complaining about something. It influences taste. It's interesting to me, though, that it also influences flavor formation. Long time ago, we looked at breakfast cereals. And we looked at breakfast cereals because there was a trend. People wanted to reduce the amount of salt in the breakfast cereal. So what the company was thinking about, instead of putting it in the dough for making it's going to be extruded to end up being a breakfast cereal, they said, let's not put any salt in the dough to make the breakfast cereal. Let's go ahead and put it on the surface after we're done. And so then it's out there, it's right on the surface, it's available for tasting right away. And it was interesting because they produced the cereals both, like I say, with no salt in the formula and salt in the formula. And we did some analysis of them. And the volatiles, the flavor, was different. The chemicals that were formed in the Maillard reaction of the extrusion process, they were different. So salt not only functions as an enhancer, it changes the Maillard reaction. It influences the Maillard reaction. So you can't simply take a product and put it on the surface. It has to be in there during the cooking process because, like I say, it changes the Maillard reaction. That wasn't anticipated. Yeast extracts, I can mention yeast extracts in context of processed flavors.
So given the composition of the HVPs, if you were to mix MSG with salt, how similar would it be to HVPs?
Well, hydrolyzed vegetable proteins, remember that they're 45% in salt, 9 to 12% monosodium glutamate. So they would come close to simulating that. You get some other contributions because a lot of things happen, dipeptides, there's some contribution there perhaps. So they wouldn't be identical, but you'd be close. Yep. So yeast extracts, flavor enhancer for savory flavors, you betcha. Brings in 5' nucleotides. That's basically how the 5' nucleotides are commercially produced, by fermentation. So, okay, get the rice yeast, do a hydrolysis, you have your 5' nucleotides. And there's a small amount of MSG also formed in the yeast extract, but it's small. Basically, it's a 5' nucleotide. That's the #1 producer. Major issues are with yeast extract are always labeling the product, consumer acceptance. Yeast extracts aren't always appreciated either on the label. So customer doesn't like monosodium glutamate, it doesn't like hydrolyzed vegetable proteins, doesn't like yeast extracts, but doesn't buy it if they don't have it. So how's that? You're kind of in a tough position on those. That's all I was going to say about HVPs. Then let me see. Okay. So this is going back to the flavor industry and how things are done. How's that? And this whole section will deal with how quality control is run in a typical flavor company. And if you look at quality control, they basically divide their group into two groups. One's a sensory group and one is an analytical group. So we've got the two groups that work independently, but basically put their results together on the finished data. Quality control lab, whether they're responsible for all finished flavors, spray drieds, emulsions, liquids, whatever. So they give a final approval to everything that goes out. They give a final approval to everything that comes in. How's that for all raw materials? And of course, they're typically responsible for problem solving. Something goes wrong, what went wrong? That oftentimes falls in the quality control laboratory's responsibility. If we look at sensory, it's based on the sensory evaluation comparison to the last sample accepted by this consumer. So flavor company, when they make a flavor, they send it out to a customer, they retain samples of that flavor. And they then go ahead and store those samples in, I think we'll see probably on one of the next slide, that they're stored in the dark bottle. It's stored with little or no airspace. It's stored under refrigeration. So we have a retention sample. If every sample goes out, they are the new reference. So the next time you make, or that company makes that batch of flavor, goes to the quality control group. The quality control group pulls it out, the retention sample, the new batch, does a side-by-side comparison and either accepts them or rejects them. This is typically done by one person or maybe two people. It doesn't go to a sensory panel. One or two people make that judgment. Yep, this is saying to me, and away it goes, or it's different. It may be a situation where a major customer says, you will run sensory? Okay, then they would. But the amount of materials coming in and out of a flavor company on a daily basis, it would be extremely demanding to expect to run sensory panels on them. And so this has to be done by an individual, typically, rather than a formal sensory panel. Sample, okay, I've already said that. Yep, there's always retention samples. That's your reference. What do we taste, or what does the quality control lab, I suppose I should say, what do they taste the flavors in? Well, they have several different media. I added milk to that one. It wasn't on your copy. I think I added hot salted water to up at the top, but so done just a couple additions here. So these are the media that's in the quality control laboratory. You may be tasting a flavor of a water solution, so plain water or hot salted water. That's a savory. It's probably going to go over to hot salted water. Sugar syrup water solution, that would be fruit flavors that aren't necessarily sweet. If you're looking for a fruit flavor, looking for something that's typically a sweet product, it would be a sugar syrup citric acid. So a sweet and, I should say, and tart. So is it an acid, tart beverage? Sweet? Is it just a sweet beverage? So again, last one is milk. So those are the 4 tasting media that typically a quality assurance laboratory has. In terms of what are these products tasted, or what products are tasted in each of these media? For a water, meat flavors can be tasted in water, butter, onion, coffee, garlic, spicy compounds, savory flavors. The meat and savory may be in hot salted water, but they go at least in a water solution. For the products that are sweet, spearmint, vanilla, peppermint, wintergreen, and banana. These are not typically sweet flavors, and so, I'm sorry, they're not tart. I'll get that one right. They're not tart. And so you pick flavors that you oftentimes go into foods that are not tart. So it's simply sweet. So 10% 68-degree brick sugar syrup plus water, yielding about a 7% sugar solution. That is the tasting solution. But these are the flavors that get tasted without tartness. Most fruit flavors do have a tartness to them. There's some acidity to them. So you do the same thing with 10% 68-degree sugar syrup and 0.3 to 0.5% citric acid is added to give it tartness. So, as I said, then there's some other special ones, so that's why I added hot salty water. Some savory are tasted in those. Vanilla very commonly is used in dairy, of course, and so dairy is the base for that. They would be tasted, vanilla flavorings would be tasted in milk. There may be some other specialty you taste. It might be a coating, a spray dry, whatever. You'd put them on something that's as neutral as you can find and taste them in maybe a chip or a cracker. The evaluation levels, so, okay, we've got our flavors. We know what we're going to taste them in. What concentration do we taste them in? Most natural flavors are used at a usage level between 0.1 and 1%. And so our natural flavors, they're not as strong typically, or traditionally as strong as artificial flavors. That's changing. At one time, natural flavors simply came from plant extracts. Now we can enhance them with pure chemicals, pure natural flavors. So they get a little more intense today than they've been in the past. So we can be working in this range. We'll taste the natural flavors 0.1 to 1%. And again, that's defined by the flavor. When you give a drum or whatever quantity of flavor to your customer, it gives a usage level on there. And you try to reproduce that usage level. So you basically can use anywhere from 0.5 to 1 mil of flavor, 200 mils of tasting media to end up between 1% or 0.1%. So you can go ahead and do this directly. Artificial flavors are typically more intense, and so you may be tasting them at 10 to 50 parts per million. And like we did in the laboratory, first thing you do is go ahead and make a dilution in alcohol. So you make a 1% solution in alcohol of your flavor, and then take some portion of that, 0.1, 0.5 mils, to put in 100 mils tasting to end up at 10 to 50 parts per million. So you're just making a dilution of the artificial flavor. Spray dries, so dried flavors, and this is spray dries only. If you're doing extrusion, you're doing coacervation, you're doing cyclodextrin, they will have different usage levels. They're going to have different amounts of flavor in them. And so when I say that these are oftentimes used about 1%, that is for spray dried flavorings. And then that's very simple. Take 1 gram of your dry flavor, 100 mils of tasting medium, dissolve it and taste that way. Artificial spray dries are more intense typically, so you do the same kind of thing. Go ahead and take 10th of a gram of your dry flavor, take it, put it in 10 mils of water, make a 1% solution, and make a dilution. So your levels are pretty much the same. When you do sensory evaluation of the product, you look for color, you look for odor, and then so appearance, obviously, color, odor, and then flavor character and flavor strength. So you're looking for all of those. Does it look right? Does it smell right? Is it have the right profile? Is it as strong as it should be? So those are what are used as criteria for performance. And you keep in mind that these flavors do change during storage. It depends upon how often you buy the product. If your customer buys it monthly, okay, the retention sample is 1 month old. It's been stored under good conditions. But supposing you buy only once every 6 months, well, then your old sample, your retention sample, is 6 months old. Do you expect it to have the same sensory quality? Well, you do take care as best you can. But if your retention sample has been around for a while, you do expect to have a little bit of brownish color to it. It does undergo the Maillard reaction, color losses and so on. Then it may get a little bit of pruning. And so if the retention sample is old and it's a little browner and it tastes a little like prunes, you're not particularly upset by it. If the new one is brown and tastes like a little more pruny, you say, that's not right. But if your retention sample is, you kind of overlook that and say, okay, I understand. Citrus flavors, they become lighter in color. They'll actually lose their color as they're stored. They become like something orange oil, lemon oil, which has a nice bright orange, bright yellow color. They can actually become almost colorless as they age and oxidize. And so they will become lighter colors as they get old. And turpentine. Now, that may not have much meaning to you, but it would be if you're in the industry. It's a very characteristic oxidized flavor that comes along with it. So you expect, again, changes in citrus flavors. Vanilla flavors become yellow or pink, and that's kind of interesting. What happens, they form shift spaces. And so your vanillin will chemically react with other components potentially in your mix and give you color. So again, you expect some of these things to happen with your retention sample. You don't expect them in your fresh sample, the sample you just made. Some colors are put into flavors. Caramel color, customer may ask you to add a caramel color to your your flavor. And so you may be judging it for color as well, not just what it tastes like or flavor of the product. And caramel color is simply diluted, 0.1 mil of caramel color, 50 mils of water. Mix it up well, and it's basically looking at a tube, a glass, like a glass cylinder, graduated cylinder. It's clear, certain size. You take a look at it, you can look down the length of it and through the side and look for the color appearance. It's visual, special grape extract. That's, of course, a Concord grape color, so a blue color. The same process. But when this is done, you add some citric acid to it because we get color from the anthocyanins, and anthocyanins are colors pH dependent. So caramel is not pH dependent. Your blue colors are pH dependent. So you judge color under acidic pH. Rejection, what happens when a flavor is rejected by the quality assurance laboratory? Basically, of course, you start looking for what went wrong. Hopefully something was omitted. There's a problem of formulation. You can do gas chromatography, mass spectrometry. You know what's in your flavor. So you may be able to tell by tasting, but certainly running an analysis of it for components. You know what's there. You can look and hope that something was missing. Maybe wrong amount of solvent was put in. You want something easy. And so basically you try to correct the problem. This is an expensive material. Nobody likes to throw things away. There's a disposal cost to getting rid of sample. So the idea is, can you get rid of 10% or mix 10% of this in with new batch that's coming through? Something that's low enough level that it's not picked up as being a defect. And so this is the first choice. Let's fix it and sell it. Okay, let's keep it and work it off with other flavors and get out of there. Discarding, like I say, is not a popular decision. These are expensive materials. And so you want to make use of them, certainly if you can. Sensory evaluation of raw materials. So, okay, talked about flavorings. But all essential oils that come in, all aromatic chemicals, all your chemicals are smelled. And so they simply are evaluated just like the materials going out. They're typically tasted in plain water. They don't put them in milk. You don't put them in solvent solution. You simply take whatever material you've got coming in, make the desired dilution of it. It certainly has to be diluted. Most essential oils, aromatic chemicals, 10 parts per million or less. So you make a dilution in alcohol, and you make another dilution to end up. Seldom you go above 10 parts per million. This is on the high end. Most oleoresins, certain oils, 1 to 5 parts per million. So these are a little stronger than those, and so they're diluted. Oiled lovage or onion oil, garlic oil are certainly pretty potent. And some materials, yes, you would make a couple dilutions before you want to touch them. They can be extremely, extremely potent. So, okay, that's all incoming materials. So there is sensory that's done all incoming materials, all finished flavors. Like I say, the analytical lab then works with the sensory lab and puts the reports together. Let's take a 10-minute break and come back, and we'll just continue with this. Well, let's go ahead and get going again. What I'll spend some time with it is going through the analytical testing that's done on flavored materials. These are the tests that are commonly done: specific gravity, total plate count if the material you are producing supports microbial growth. Now, most of your chemicals, your liquid flavors, they're not going to be supporting growth of anything. So it might be some emulsions, it could be certainly some encapsulated flavoring materials. So you'd only do total thing count, or, well, there's a couple others too. But anyway, any micro-testing only on some flavored materials. Refractive index, volatile oil content, particle size, alcohol content, and flash point. So those are the analytical tests that are commonly done on flavorings and the raw materials. In terms of, there are four other tests that are commonly done on raw materials only, not on finished flavors. So this is finished flavors and raw materials. This is just raw materials. Scoville heat units, optical rotation. You may well be doing some gas chromatography or HPLC on them as well. So these are common tests. The most common are refractive index, specific gravity. Refractive index and specific gravity, they're just kind of a gross overall measurement. Do I have the right mixture? Is that every chemical has a different refractive index. The value we get is the sum of everything that's there. So you get kind of a good view of the overall composition. The same for specific gravity. There are two tests that are run very quickly, very easily. Say, do I have the right blend of flavor chemicals? Flash point is necessary these days for shipping, and that's certainly an issue these days. Flavoring materials are flammable. They're hazardous materials that we're going to put in our food, of course. But we usually don't worry about the food catching fire, so we don't worry about it there. For refractive index, having a refractometer is still a classic material or classic piece of equipment. Covers the refractive index from 1.33 to 1.7. Accurate to 4 decimal places. Requires a couple drops of samples. It's very, very quick. You put it on the lens and simply basically what you're looking at. Here's your light source and refractive light, array of light, and refractive. And so the refractive index is the ratio of the incident light versus the refractive light. So it's the ratio of those angles of refraction. Water is 1.33. The refractive index, okay, that's basically what I said. It looks for errors in compounding. Has the flavor been formulated correctly? And that's becoming less common, errors in compounding. At one time it was done manually, now it's largely done automated. We put a formula in, basically, you got all the hoses, the lines coming in to formulate your product. So that's less of an issue today than ever before. Specific gravity, function total components additionally, traditionally run by pycnometer. If you've ever run a pycnometer, that's really an annoyance to do. It takes a great deal of time to do. But again, there's an instrument now that will do that and does it automated manner. So you can get a specific gravity very, very quickly. Some flavors, again, we do, some flavors that have an alcohol solvent system. So these would be typically your liquid flavoring materials. So liquids where you have ethanol as a solvent. That goes back to the tax that's charged to alcohol. I mentioned that if you're in the food business, if you're in flavor business, and you're using alcohol, you pay tax on that alcohol as it comes into the plant. And you can have millions of dollars tied up in tax money. And so you want to account for every drop of that. Okay? We bought this much, we pay tax on it, we're selling this much flavor, that flavor is not drinkable as is, we get our tax money back. So it's an annoyance to work with it, ethanol, simply because of all the bookkeeping. The idea it has to be lock and key so nobody steals your ethanol and what makes off with it in the night. And so there's different ways to determine alcohol content in your flavoring material. Gas chromatography, 10-15 minute analysis, very, very quick to do. In some cases, it was done by distillation and then looking at specific gravity. So distilling a flavor and taking the distillate. But typically, gas chromatography is the simplest and quickest way to do that. If you're making emulsions, emulsions are basically unstable systems. It's another one of those things where we want nature to behave differently than it does. If flavored materials are lighter than water, they're going to float. It may not float for 1 day or 1 week or 1 year, but eventually they will float. And so they basically undergo phase separation. And so one of the major indicators of stability of emulsion is the particle size distribution. The smaller the particle, the more slowly it rises, the more slowly it separates. And so if you can get it small enough, then you will actually have quite a stable emulsion. Density is also important. So having something where you balance out the density, the oils are lighter. You can have a weighing agent, so you make those oils heavier, closer to water. So make the density better, more like water, and make a nice fine particle. You'll get a good deal of stability to that emulsion. So every emulsion is always checked for particle size. And like I say, that's to indicate potential separation. If you're in a smaller company, you are not going to pay $50,000 to $70,000, whatever a particle size analyzer is cost these days. And it's done by microscope. And that was funny. The first time I visited a flavor company long ago, it's a fairly big company, but they were still using a microscope. And I said, well, if you use a microscope, you have to count 500 drops, and then you have to size, because there's a stage micrometer on there, so you can estimate the size. You've got to do 500 of these, and you've got to take an average in 2 different fields. And the guy looked at me like I was crazy. No, we look at the emulsion and we say it's good or it's bad. We don't count particles or measure particles. And that's interesting because the fellow I was talking to had done this for probably 15 years, and he was probably okay. He would know if an emulsion was good or bad by that time. But it isn't what I kind of expected coming out of an academic setting where you got to do it this way. He simply took a look at it and said, yep, it's good or it's bad. So that's still done that way in smaller companies. There's different methodologies also. A Coulter counter is another method of measuring particle size. It's a little more tedious than laser light scanning. So in the case of a Coulter counter, it's if I can describe it in a way in which you can visualize what I'm trying to describe, there's like a glass tube, and the glass tube has a very tiny hole in the side. And so you put electrical potential on one side in the glass tube and then outside the glass tube. The only way electricity can run between the two is through that little hole, that tiny hole. And so then you apply a vacuum, you start drawing liquid, your emulsion, through that hole. And every time a droplet of flavor comes to that hole, the electrical potential, electrical flow is less. And so what the machine's doing is it's seeing how often am I getting changes in electrical flow through that little tube, and how often and how big is that change in potential. So it's still done. It works very well. The only problem you run into is that sometimes you're using something like gum acacia. Gum acacia can have lumps in it because that hole in the tube is about 15 microns. And so if you've got anything that's not dissolved in your material, in your emulsion, it's going to plug that hole, and then you're annoyed for some time while you try to clean it out. So anyway, not the preferred method. There's easier ways to do it. And, the light scattering solutions are what, of course, we do and what most companies do today. There's a downside to light scattering. It can be very accurate, but the problem is it doesn't distinguish between particles. If you have particles that may not be your emulsion, then you can get some bad numbers. An example of that was we were working with coffee emulsion. And the coffee emulsion, there was coffee oil in it that was emulsified. And then, like I say, coffee itself, in solution, you looked at the data output, and it's bimodal. So there's one distribution around 1 to 2 microns, and there's another about 20 microns. So why do I have an emulsion that's got 1 to 2 and then up to 20? Didn't make any sense. You look at it under a microscope, which you know the 20 microns would crystallize caffeine. And so the machine didn't distinguish between them. It was a particle. And so they counted it and said, okay, these are droplets of oil. Didn't know any better. So in this case, it certainly gave us erroneous results. Normally that's not the case, but keep in mind that it's just simply counting particles. It's not necessarily counting your particles or oil droplets. If there's any other particles, it's going to measure them too. Zeta potential, I hope most of you have an appreciation for zeta potential. It is the electrical charge, surface charge on a droplet. And that's one of the things that really keeps droplets from coming together and rising to the top. If all those droplets, and all droplets do have some electrical charge, if they have a strong electrical charge, they repel each other, and they won't come together and rise. And so zeta potential is important in terms of predicting stability of an emulsion. And so again, there's a nice piece of equipment for that. We have one downstairs in Tonia's lab. Basically, it measures mobility of particles, put an electric field, and those particles will migrate based on their electrical charge. So you look at their size, you look at the viscosity of the solution they're in, and how fast they're moving. You can then get a measurement of electrical charge on the particles. So that's an important one oftentimes for determining emulsion stability as well. What is the zeta potential? Higher the potential, the more stable the emulsion. So particle size and electrical charge. Extremely important in terms of predicting emulsion stability. Residual solvent, remember oleoresins, what are they made from? How are they made? They're basically made from spices and by solvent extraction. So there were specifications, I don't remember, was it like 20, 25 parts per million residue solvent is okay? Well, then how do you detect that? How do you know if your oleoresin that you made has gotten rid of the solvent? Again, done by gas chromatography, a fairly simple measurement. Scoville heat units, measurement of pungency or mouth bite. I think we mentioned this at one time or another. Determined in oleoresins. Remember, the oleoresins do have mouthfeel. You can get taste components from the oleoresins. And so the heat of a spice like red pepper, capsicum. And so it's interested in what is the heat of a given spicy preparation of oleoresin. And so the Scoville heat unit is defined as a dilution that gives a threshold mouth burn or bite to 3 out of 5 people. So it is done traditionally by sensory panel. And again, it's interesting how things change. Just like people don't necessarily count particles in their microscope these days, look at emulsions, they have equipment for it. In the old days, they used the Hall intercept methodology. Is anybody familiar with the Hall intercept methodology? Very classical method. Well, you walk down the hall with your samples, and when you run into somebody, you say, "Would you taste these?" And you taste them, and you go, "Tell me when it burns." Okay. And then they go on to the next person you happen to see in the hallway. And, you can kind of chuckle at that, but that was exactly the way it was done. There was about that little respect for sensory analysis, too, that they said this counts, which it was interesting. Not done that way anymore. Typically done either by sensory panel or analytical methodology. There's been enough work done that people know what chemicals, burning chemicals, are in these oleoresins. They know what to look for. They know how hot they are. So based on your HPLC profile, you can get quite an accurate estimate of the Scoville heat units. So the units are still around, but they're typically now determined by analytical methods instead of sensory methods. Optical rotation measures the rotation of plain polarized light as it passes through a solution of essential oil or oleoresin. And that's just another chemical parameter that you look at when you're looking at primarily an incoming essential oil or oleoresin. Many of the really sensory, most active components do have optical activity. They will rotate plain polarized light. So it's just another standard that's run. Here we got this material coming in. Let's get this specification on it. Gas chromatography done on raw materials only, seldom on finished flavors, and the purpose is to determine the purity of purchased materials. So what am I buying? You'd like to be buying, 99% of something. Is that what it is? You look for impurities. Well, you're buying a certain component, usually a pure chemical. How much of that, how much impurities that go along with it. Do you ever give a chromatogram of finished flavor to a customer? No. You don't want to do that. And I think I mentioned that before. The idea is the chromatogram will never be the same for the same flavor. It will always be different. You're using different materials. Each time you formulate the flavor for it, you make it this month, 6 months later you make it again. You've got different materials, so there'll be different impurities in those materials, different age, different oxidation perhaps. It's going to be different. And as soon as you give it to your customer, and the customer says, that's not what you sold me last time. I want what I got last time, and it is what you got last time. The sensory is what's important. It tastes the same, performs the same. I don't care what it looks like. But and oftentimes it surprises, well, maybe it doesn't surprise a person, but how often customers ask for that. They think it has value. And really it doesn't. If it tastes right, it's good. Volatile, encapsulated flavoring. So what I'm talking about so far was really mostly essential oils, oleoresins, finished flavoring materials. Encapsulated flavors obviously have different things to measure. Volatile oil or flavor load, you certainly want to know how much flavor is in your encapsulated material. You set out on all spray dries to aim for 20% flavor. There may be exceptions to that, but that's a fairly common load. And so, are you delivering? Is there that 20% or close to 20% flavor load? What's the moisture content? Moisture content is really important. The effect of water activity and chemical reactions. So, moisture content. Also, something's high moisture, you're buying water. Do you really want to buy water? Not really. You've got a whole faucet full of it. So, again, you want to buy product. Surface oil. If something isn't encapsulated, there's a little bit of orange oil, whatever, on the surface of the powder. Is everything inside? Is everything protected? Is some on the outside? That's certainly of interest because that's what's going to oxidize. That's going to have a short shelf life. Shelf life isn't commonly done. That's done in development of a process. It's done formulation development, but it's not done before you send your flavor out to a consumer. And so that would be done in research development, but not routine. Microbiology, most flavor companies don't do microbiology. They send it out, whether it's total plate count or some other methodology. And keep in mind, none of your liquid flavors will support microbial growth. And so that's not a problem. 6-year emulsions and potentially spray dry. That could give you some problems microbially. And like I say, they're sent out for analysis. The volatile oil content of spray dries, let's say you're buying an essential oil that's been encapsulated for protection. 2 ways that it's, there's more than 2 ways, but at least the 2 most common ways. One way is to do it by distillation. And so, let me see if I go through that. I will go through it. Not suitable for water-soluble flavorings, and you'll see why when we take a look at it. Generally used for citrus powders and may be expressed as a weight or volume basis, and I'll explain both of those. So these are Clevenger traps. What you would take is you would have a balloon flask or round bottom flask here. You put water in the flask, you'd add your spray dry encapsulated flavor to it, or emulsion for that matter. Close it up, well, put a couple boiling stones in there, here we go, now, and close it up. Start heating it, you're going to start boiling the water, and that water is going to vaporize your flavor and drag your pusher flavor up here into the condenser. Up there, your volatile flavors and water condense and drip down into the side arm. Then they're going to be dripping into here until it fills it up to the point where it's running back at a certain level. This Lego appears in, and you're getting the distillate like that. And so you start off right away with mostly water, but you're constantly distilling more flavor. So you build up a column of flavor. And after something like 2 hours, you simply let it cool. You may read the volume. This is in milliliters. Read the number of milliliters up here. And so that's milliliters of flavor per gram or 100 grams. You want to convert it to that of flavor all around that you put in for distillation. It is very simple. It's a very common method. It's still done a lot. But you can see if you had a water-soluble component in there. If you have water-soluble component over here, where does it go? It goes up here, down here, back there, down here. And so it just distills its merry way around the process. So it only works for really essential oils. It doesn't work typically for a finished flavor, where you've got other things blended into it. There are a couple of essential oils, not really many, that are heavier than water. And so this is set up for something that's heavier than water. You do exactly the same thing. You have your round bottle flask over here, a heating mantle, dissolve your encapsulated flavor over here with water, and start distilling, and condenses and drops down here. Flavors heavier than water will tend to accumulate here, and water will keep on running back. So that's really, really rare. And so we have oils that are heavier than water. So most of the time we're looking at this particular system here. We actually do most of our orange oil measurement, essential oil measurement, encapsulated products by gas chromatography. We do it by gas chromatography because we're going to be looking for oxidation anyway. So we're going to go through a certain methodology, and we might as well get our orange oil content at the same time. And I'll explain that here. This method does work for both water-soluble or insoluble flavorings. Works for either one. That's an advantage over the Clevenger. And so our process methodology, sample preparation, is acetone precipitation. So we've got a spray-dried flavor, for example, encapsulated flavor. We solubilize the flavor in water, and we make a 15% solid solution in water. So we just simply take the water, take the powder, mix it up to dissolve it. Mix well, take 1 milliliter of that, so 1 milliliter of the dissolved flavor, put it in another vial in that case, add 4 volumes of acetone with an internal standard, and mix and allow to settle. Do you know why we put acetone in there at that point?
Because you can't put water in the GC.
Because what?
You can't put water in the GC.
You don't want water in the GC. That's the number one point. You simply would try to inject this, forget it. It would be a problem. The physician would not be happy. Also, remember, we've got the glycation, modified starch, and whatever in the solution as well, too. And so, our second reason, second is 4 volumes of acetone will precipitate any gums. And so they now have a clear solution that we can check. Allow to settle, not filter, filter that works, allow to settle and do gas chromatography. And so that gives us a pretty nice schematogram that has an internal standard. We get a nice peak for limonene or whatever terpenes. And we go out a little bit further and we find 2 nice little peaks for the oxidation products, of citrus oil. So we're able to measure the total flavor, and we're able to measure the oxidized components of that flavor. These are looking at different methods. There's 3 different methods we compared one time, and they all give very, very similar data when it comes right down to it, whether it's Clevenger, whether it's acetone precipitation. And I no longer even remember what GC absorption is. How's that? It's been that long since we've used it. So anyway, the methodologies give pretty good reproducible data. Moisture content is important to us. Look at moisture content. How do we measure it? You can measure it by vacuum oven. That may sound kind of funny. I'm going to take my spray dried flavor. I'm going to put it 100 degrees centigrade and under a vacuum. Won't I lose my flavor? You know, why will water be lost and not my flavor? Well, it goes back to, again, those particles. They trap flavor. Flavor's too big to migrate out. Water will migrate out in the oven, but flavor won't. So we can use a vacuum oven, even though we're measuring material that has a very volatile flavor. Carl Fisher, gas chromatography. Any of these methods work to measure water. Very commonly we use the Carl Fisher. So a very simple methodology. It's certainly well proven. Vacuum oven, Carl Fisher. I don't know. Probably many of you have run the Carl Fisher methodology. Extraction of water into methanol. So you would take your powder. You would use anhydrous methanol because you're going to measure water. And so you put your powder into anhydrous methanol. The water will go leach out into the methanol. So at some time, this powder and methanol will become, let's say, at equilibrium. So our water moves out into the methanol. Then titrate it. And simply, you titrate the water that came over. So it's a very simple, very quick methodology. There's been some concern said that aldehydes will interfere with it. We haven't seen that. So if there's any aldehydes in the flavor, they say, oh, it might be a problem. Just haven't seen it. So Carl Fisher is a simple, quick way to go. Surface oil. So that's an interesting one to me because you look at surface oil, as I said, that's a measure of what's out on the surface of your encapsulated powder. And that's really prone to oxidation. And we have both a short method and a fast method in terms of a gravimetric approach. What we can do literally for a short method, we can take our powder, we can put it in pentane, let's have a nice solution of pentane, put our powder in, stir it all up, your flavors making on the surface with solid pentane, run through filter paper, you've got your clear pentane surface oil, evaporate it, do a gravimetric way the residue. Or you could just evaporate it to a certain point and do gas chromatography. So that's a very short method. It gets the surface oil. Another approach is that some people like to do a sock slit. Again, probably most of you remember what a sock slit is. That's basically where you have this nice filter of thimble, I guess is the right word for it, right? So we got the nice thing. We'll talk to the analytical people for analysis. So you got this porous thimble. You can put your powder in there and put it inside the sock slit. Remember, you have ether, you have solvent to distill up. It fills the chamber where the thimble is. You extract out your flavor material, whatever, and it drains back into the bottom. So it's kind of fill, drain, and so on. And you do that for 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever, but there's really no purpose for it. What is on the surface is on the surface, and it rinses off immediately. So some people publish a long method. I don't see how to do it. You simply wash it with an organic solvent, and that's good enough. You could do it, like I say, gravimetrically, or in fact, you could take the pentane, whatever you wash the surface with, evaporate it to a certain point, and do gas chromatography. So you could measure how much essential oil was on that surface and just got washed off or extracted. It's interesting to me that, well, that's basically what those were. We commonly have specifications on our flavor about so much surface oil or less than so much surface oil. And for flavorings, actually, surface oil isn't particularly important. It's not particularly important because your flavors are volatile. You don't have much surface oil. If there's something that didn't get included in the powder, it evaporates in the hot air that just went out the roof of the building that you're working in. If you're doing fish oil, you're doing colorants, you're doing non-volatile materials, then that oil on the surface is really important because it stays there and it's the first thing to oxidize. So we in the flavor business don't pay much attention to surface oil, but certainly other industries, other materials, they do pay a lot of attention to it. Shelf life, like I said, we tend not to do shelf life. That's done only in development. There's many different ways to determine shelf life. Oxygen uptake. If you would have walked by Ted Labuza's office, you would see some manometers. They used to have mercury in them, but I think the health and safety people come and took it all away from them. But there are manometers up there, and those manometers are for what was called a Warburg apparatus. And the Warburg basically was, a round bottom flask. You put your powder in the round bottom flask. I want to see if it's going to oxidize. And you then hook that up to a manometer. And as something oxidizes, it consumes the oxygen, the pressure changes, and so the manometer changes. So by how much pressure change, you can measure how much oxygen was consumed. And so oxygen uptake. Bruna, who's here from Brazil in our lab, she has not the same methodology, but the same principle, where she puts it in a chamber and monitors the change in pressure in the chamber. It's a nice way to do it, in a sense. So very, very simple. I'll ask if she's got mercury in there from manometer cell. Peroxide value, you can also do a traditional peroxide value determination, just like you do for fats and oils in the lab. We do it by gas chromatography just because it's simple. That's how we do it. We get the limonene content, we get the flavor load, and degree of oxidation. So we can measure very easily oxidation. So that's basically that. Peroxide value, it's the same methodology, titration, and again, our acetone precipitation, exactly what we went through before. And we have some question whether or not we should also be measuring a third component. There are two limonene oxidation products. Limonene is what oxidizes. Limonene oxide are the oxidation products. And we probably should be looking at a third oxidation product, carbone. Now, it's probably more information than you need or is relevant. But we're certainly looking at this now. Should we be measuring a third component in that run? And this is what the chematograph looks like, or chematograms look like, I should say. So this is a fresh orange oil. We have actually alpha-pinene, beta-pinene, we have deep-limonene. Here's an internal standard in the run. And out here, someplace around this area, we will find oxidation products. So this is a fresh orange oil. Here's an oxidized orange oil, alpha-beta-pinene, limonene. And this component is a limonene oxide, so just after 8 minutes. It's a little hard to see, but there's not much up here. There's a good sized peak here. So, again, very simple to measure that limonene oxidation product. This is kind of what we get out of data. And so this is just some shelf life studies looking at orange oil. Actually plated onto different materials and then put into shelf life testing. We'll see how there's a little bit of a lag phase, and then we see limonene oxide or oxidation happen in each of these materials. That's actually I think what I mentioned is a cyanoid material. But you see oxidation. It's just easy way to get data for this. Microbiology, there's little microbiology done in-house. Total plant count, maybe, yeast and molds, maybe, but the only thing they're really interested in are spray-dried and emulsions. I've mentioned that already. So very commonly that work goes all to service laboratories. Problem solving, that's what, again, where the quality assurance laboratory gets involved. What went wrong? Customer has a complaint. What happened to the flavor? There's a few slides that come up. And do you have slides that come up after this?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you've got these. Oh, good. I was hoping I didn't add them today. Okay. So problem solving. And Frank Villaro works for Comax Flavors, and he's an analytical person to the bone. he just enjoys it a great deal. He got a new gas chromatograph and mass spectrometer. I think he told everybody in the world he was so thrilled, jumping around with excitement. Nice to see. So what this last section looks at is how flavors will react with each other, or more commonly with the solvent. When we put the solvent in, such as ethanol or propylene glycol, they're reactive. They will actually react with your flavor. And so what Frank did has presented a little bit of studies that he's done on flavorings in-house. And so chemical reactions that can occur, well, we've got ethanol. That's our solvent, right? So we have 90% ethanol. And if there's any acids in that flavoring, so acids that we want in that flavoring, give a nice tart note to the flavor, what can happen? The acid can react with ethanol to give us an ester. So we've gone from something that was kind of tart to something that's fruity. Most esters kind of fall in the category of being fruity. So our flavor has lost some of its character in the process. Another alternative, so we can get ester formation, we can also get acetal formation. And so here's again our aldehyde and our ethanol. And so we can actually add on a functional group. So we get an acetal form. So our aldehyde is here, but there's now a diethyl. So there's two ethanol groups that have been added on. And that's not pleasant. In terms of sensory properties, it's really not pleasant. And that causes some problems in the industry. Because these acetals aren't stable. If you put them into a product, there's a little bit of acid in that product. Basically, you free up those acetals. So the problem comes if you've got a container of flavor and someone would just go ahead and take it out and put it into developing a product, and they'd smell it. Oh my God, this is horrible. But let it sit for a while with the product, and it'll break down to its normal good flavor. And so you get a lot of complaints from the people in product development. You gave me a terrible flavor. It's absolutely horrible. Well, no, it'll be recovered. Go ahead and put it in your product, and it'll actually break down back to the aldehyde and the ethanol. So it isn't as much of a problem as you might think. How's that? This is changes in apricot flavor. So flavor that was made at Comax. In terms of acids, acetic acid, 2-methylbutyric acid, hexanoic, and octanoic. So these are parts of the flavor that were put in to make an apricot flavor. So these are acids. And what happens then, of course, you'll get some ethyl acetate, so you get some esters being formed. And you can get esters formed of each of these from your acetic acid. Your 2-methylbutyric goes into, again, ester forms. So formation of esters, yeah. Each of those acids will form some esters. By the way, they are permanent. They don't break down. The acetals are ugly. They do break down. The esters are kind of pleasant, but they're permanent. And so that's just showing, yep, so he could show there was caproic acid, octanoic acid, and we get esters in these cases. And so, of course, this is running a fresh sample of the apricot flavor. Here's acetic acid, nice big acid, 2-methylbutyric acid, nice big caproic acid, octanoic acid, important components of that flavor. 8 days later, you're starting to find, oh, here's an ester that's now being formed. So, acetic acid, and here's an ester. So, we're starting to lose a little bit of that. Really not finding anything else or enough of anything else after 8 days. After 6 weeks, yeah, more fruitiness. Oh, here's some more fruity compounds. Then we're getting fruity compounds that are being formed. And if we look at after 5.5 months, our flavor has irreversibly changed to a fruity flavor, or more fruity flavor. So here's that acetate, now a pretty significant component. It's still not a great deal, but it's changed. Yeah, the flavor's changed from the fresh.
Would this storage be at room temperature or?
Yep, that was all ambient.
Is the last heat period just about the 50? Is that just oxidation?
Which one?
It's 50.
Okay.
Further down, the super tall one.
Oh, super tall.
There wasn't enough personally long.
Oh. 49 of, well, yeah, it's
The fresh sample.
yeah, it's not, that's true, it's not, but he may not have run it out far enough to see that. It's not something that's formed. So okay, your sample is changing in fruity character. And so this is interesting. On aging, it's got fruitier. And this is the ester, how much ester has been formed. That ester, that ester, that ester. This is then a sensory characterization. At 1 week, so lax fruitiness, slightly fruity, better impact, good, pretty nice, really nice. How's that? The flavor improved. You really don't want to have to age your flavors for 5 months, though, to have them come out the way you want. So the flavor changes. That's the point. Okay, now acetal. So fruity doesn't hurt you too much. Acetals does. Like I say, they tend to be rather ugly. So here's an aldehyde plus ethanol, making the acetal. And again, they're typically diethyl acetals. So that's acetaldehyde. Again, acetaldehyde reacting with ethanol, reaction propane glycol. So propane glycol is a solvent used in flavors. Ethanol is a water-soluble solvent used in flavors. So both of them are dilutes. Both of them are commonly used solvents. And again, if you've got any aldehydes in that form, they will form these diacetals. And the diacetals, like I say, are unpleasant. And so this is orange pineapple. A nice orange pineapple. Acetaldehyde is a nice fresh orange. That really makes a nice fresh orange. You'd love to have that. And so what we get is we get no other acetals at this point. There's a little bit of diacetyl up here. It's coming out. And we've got the esters in there. That will tend to increase overnight, 6 weeks of storage. Here's our diethyl acetal. It's our largest component of that in the run. And again, this is where the other flavor changed nicely. When we used ethanol as a solvent, put that same flavor into propylene glycol solvent, and it doesn't become so nice. And it's freshly made, juicy, ripe, good, juicy, ripe, good. Green note, very green, on discard, undesirable notes. Certainly. Changes in vanilla flavor, they don't think we got any sensory that goes along with that. Vanilla almond, so this is analytical work. Benzaldehyde, vanilla almond flavor. This was, I don't know if this is percent area peak, but anyway, it's a measurement of how much has benzaldehyde. Benzaldehyde, remember, is almond if it's not acid. So over 3 weeks, it lost, what, 70% or something like that, more than 70% of benzaldehyde. What was formed, the benzaldehyde propylene glycol acetal. So we lost the characteristic flavor and picked up this off flavor replacement. Vanillin wasn't as reactive. It will react, but not as reactive. So it formed an acetal, and it formed an acetal very quickly, but it was kind of stable throughout time. Ethyl vanillin also reasonably stable over time. So I guess that the point of this is that these flavors will react. Sometimes people don't send them out right away to the customer. They age them so they can get some age. That one flavor improved, it got fruitier, but aging will destroy some other ones. The propylene glycol acetals are absolutely ugly. The ethanol acetals are somewhat tolerable. So just that solvent is extremely reactive, and that can influence the flavor that you get. But keeping in mind the acetals do go away. The esters don't go away. So it's just an interesting one, I guess. Okay, here's one way to reduce that 0.1% sodium bicarbonate in the flavor. Inhibits the formation of these acetals, slows them down. And that's kind of the point. So a little bit of water also helps. So there's ways to manage that. But it's one time or one place where flavor companies get complaints that they probably shouldn't. Well, that's the end of this. I don't know if it's worthwhile starting another topic. How about if we don't? Then let's put it up to vote. How many people want to stay for another hour or two? Well, maybe I biased the vote by asking it that way. Anyway, yeah, let's call it quits. But we're going to doing emulsions. Emulsions are fun. They're one of the things, again, we're trying to change nature. We don't want flavors to separate, and it's an interesting struggle. So, have a good evening. We'll catch you again.
Yeah.